The police station hummed with the low buzz of fluorescent lights, phones ringing and officers moving through corridors like shadows. It was late afternoon, that in-between hour when the city seemed to exhale a tired sigh, the sunlight bleeding gold across scuffed floors. Detective Harris sat behind his desk, scanning incident reports, when the doors swung open and a small, frantic officer pushed a man through, a suspect in a minor assault case. But there was something about him that made Harris pause. His eyes were hollow, his posture unnervingly calm, and across his left wrist, a black tattoo glimmered under the fluorescent glare. The station was chaotic. Officers shouted instructions, phones clattered against desks, and a few civilians waited nervously. Amid the chaos, a little girl sat on a faded plastic chair, clutching a small backpack with a unicorn sticker peeling off the corner. Her mother, a woman whose face was carved with worry lines far too deep for her age, hovered nearby. The girl's dark brown eyes darted around the room, wide and alert, as if she were seeing things no one else could. Detective Harris noticed her immediately. There was a weight in her gaze, a quiet intensity that seemed older than her 10 years. He had seen children in police stations before, frightened, confused, but this girl's stare was different. It held a memory, something buried that refused to let go. The suspect shifted his weight, noticing the small figure in the chair. His eyes flicked briefly toward her, a subtle, almost imperceptible twitch of recognition, but it passed quickly. He tried to smirk, but it faltered, a crack in a carefully constructed mask. And then the little girl leaned forward. Her voice was a whisper, so soft that at first Harris thought he imagined it. "My father had that same tattoo," she said. The words hung in the air like smoke. The room seemed to pause. Phones stopped ringing. Conversation ceased mid-sentence. Even the suspect froze, his jaw tightening as his eyes flicked down to his own wrist. The tattoo, a coiled serpent wrapped around an anchor, was no ordinary design. It was distinct, precise, almost ceremonial. And now, in the eyes of a child, it held meaning. Detective Harris leaned forward, heart thumping in sudden, inexplicable anticipation. "What did you say, kid?" he asked gently, crouching so he could meet her at eye level. She repeated it, her small voice unwavering. The mother gasped, clutching the girl's shoulder, and for a moment the world outside the station ceased to exist. Before anyone could respond further, the police dog, a massive German shepherd named Ranger, suddenly stiffened. The dog had been lying lazily near the holding cells, ears twitching at distant sounds, tail thumping against the floor. But now Ranger's body went rigid, every muscle taut. He growled, low and warning, his eyes locked on the suspect's tattoo as if he could see something invisible to the human eye. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried weight, resonating in the chest of everyone in the room. The suspect's smirk vanished. He tried to ignore the dog, taking a cautious step backward, but Ranger moved with uncanny precision, blocking the path. Officers shouted commands, their voices sharp and tense, but the dog ignored them, his attention solely on the tattoo. His growl deepened, vibrating like a warning drumbeat. Every instinct in the room screamed that something was unfolding, something unplanned, raw, and dangerous. Detective Harris's pulse quickened. "Ranger, sit," he commanded, but the dog did not obey. He stayed planted, refusing to move an inch, tail stiff, eyes never leaving the man. The little girl watched, her small hand clutching the edge of the chair. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She only stared, a silent knowledge in her gaze, as if she and the dog shared an unspoken secret that no adult could comprehend. The mother whispered urgently, What is he doing?" Her voice trembled, fear threading every word. Harris shook his head slowly, unable to answer. He had trained with Ranger for years, handled him through countless arrests and dangerous situations, but this was different. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't training. Something primal, almost spiritual, was happening right before their eyes. The suspect's confidence faltered. He swallowed hard, sweat beading along his temple. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. His voice cracked, betraying the calm he had tried to maintain. Ranger's growl intensified, vibrating through the tile floors, his body shifting subtly forward, a silent threat that refused to relent. The officers exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to intervene or trust that the dog's reaction held meaning they couldn't yet grasp. The little girl's voice, small but firm, cut through the tension. "He knows my dad," she whispered again. He hurt him." Her words were soft, almost inaudible to everyone but Harris and Ranger, but the effect was immediate. Ranger's growl softened, turning into a low, almost mournful whine as though the dog understood the gravity of the child's statement. His eyes never left the suspect, but his posture shifted, guarded, sorrowful, as if mourning someone lost long ago. Harris's mind raced. A cold case from years earlier, an undercover officer who had vanished without a trace, flashed through his memory. The details were hazy, the file buried under decades of paperwork, but something about the tattoo matched exactly. The man in front of them could be connected. Could the girl's father, her missing father, be tied to this moment in ways no one yet understood? The suspect took a step back, nearly tripping over his own feet. Ranger pressed forward slightly, the growl now a low rumble of warning and recognition. Officers tensed, hands on holsters, but Harris raised his palm. "Hold," he said, voice steady but low. The scene felt surreal, cinematic in its intensity. A little girl, a tattoo, a dog, forces colliding in a quiet drama that no one could have scripted. The girl stood suddenly, small legs trembling but determined. She pointed at the tattoo. "He has it. Just like my dad," she said again, this time louder, drawing the attention of the entire room. The suspect's eyes widened and his carefully constructed facade began to crumble. He opened his mouth to speak, but Ranger barked sharply, precise, controlled, demanding attention. The sound echoed in the hall, bouncing off the walls like a verdict waiting to be delivered. And then silence. Everyone froze. The tension in the room was a living thing, coiled and waiting to strike. Harris knew deep in his gut that this moment would unravel everything. Something long buried, hidden by time and fear, was about to surface. Ranger's eyes, dark and unyielding, held the man in place. The little girl's gaze, fearless and certain, anchored the truth. And in that suspended heartbeat, the room seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting for what would come next. The air was thick with suspense. The story of a missing father, a child's memory, and a dog's uncanny instincts all intertwining. And the world was about to shift in ways no one could predict. The police station seemed to shrink around the girl as she followed the unfolding scene. The suspect sat rigid in the holding cell, glancing nervously at the dog that refused to obey its handler. Ranger's growls were low but persistent, a language only he and some unseen force understood. The little girl, Emma, tugged slightly at her mother's sleeve. I know him," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. "He was with my dad." Her mother froze, panic and disbelief flashing across her face. "Emma, what are you saying?" Emma swallowed hard, trying to force the memory into words. "I remember I was 5. Daddy showed me a tattoo like that. He said it meant he was brave and that he'd always protect me." Her small hands clenched the straps of her backpack as her voice faltered. I think he hurt Daddy." Detective Harris's mind raced. He had handled hundreds of suspects, seen countless confessions, and processed more crime scenes than he cared to count. But the intensity of this moment was unlike anything he'd witnessed. A child's memory, a missing father, a tattooed man whose every breath hinted at secrets, and a police dog acting beyond reason. Every element of this tableau screamed of a story that had lain dormant for years, waiting for the perfect moment to surface. Ranger's growl escalated into a low, threatening bark. The dog's tail stiffened, his hackles rising ever so slightly. Officers instinctively reached for their weapons, eyes darting between the dog and the suspect. But Harris held up a hand. "He's not attacking," he said, his voice quiet, almost reverent. "He's recognizing." The suspect's eyes flicked from the dog to the girl. His composure cracked further as the room seemed to tighten around him. "You don't understand," he muttered, his voice rough and trembling. "I didn't," he stopped, swallowing hard. Sweat slicked his temples, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the bench. There was a panic in his eyes, a mix of fear and guilt. Emma stepped forward, tiny but determined, her gaze unwavering. "Did you see him? "My dad, did you hurt him?" she asked, her voice soft but cutting through the tension like a knife. The suspect's lips quivered. He wanted to deny it to escape this accusation with lies, but the dog's unwavering stare pinned him down. Ranger's eyes were sharp, intelligent, almost accusatory, as if demanding the truth. The station fell silent, every officer frozen in anticipation. Emma's mother gasped, clutching her daughter's shoulders. "Emma, you don't know what you're saying," she whispered, voice breaking. "Yes, I do," Emma insisted. She took a shaky breath. "I remember Daddy telling me stories about a man with that tattoo. He said Daddy saved him, but that he got into trouble because of it. Daddy didn't come home after that." Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not flinch. Her memory had surfaced with a clarity that frightened even Harris, and the dog seemed to sense the depth of her recall. The suspect's eyes darted to the side, then back to the tattoo, as if seeing it for the first time under the scrutiny of a child's memory. I don't know what you mean," he stammered, his voice faltering. He tried to shift, to create distance between himself and Ranger, but the dog blocked every subtle movement. Ranger's growl deepened, resonating like a drumbeat, a warning echoing off the walls. Detective Harris realized something uncanny. This was not about training. Ranger was reacting to something deeply personal, something buried in the suspect's past. "Ranger, sit," he commanded again, but the dog's ears twitched, his body remaining taut, unyielding. Harris exchanged a look with Officer Miller, who shrugged helplessly. Neither had ever seen a K-9 act like this, outside of instinctive attack commands. Ranger wasn't just reacting, he was remembering. Emma's gaze sharpened. "He knows Daddy," she whispered, almost to herself. "He knows what happened." Her voice trembled as the pieces of a puzzle long forgotten began snapping into place. Her small hands pressed against her cheeks, and yet she did not back away. She had recognized the man's guilt before anyone else in the room. The suspect's face was pale now, sweat glistening along his forehead. His jaw trembled. I can't, you don't understand," he whispered, his voice cracking. Ranger barked sharply, a single bark that seemed to slice through the air like a verdict. The dog's eyes were locked on the suspect's wrist, then darted to the girl as if acknowledging her recognition. Emma stepped closer, courage swelling despite the fear knotting her stomach. "Did my dad save you?" she asked softly, almost pleading. The question seemed to hang in the air, heavy with tension. The suspect's eyes widened in shock. He could not answer, not yet. The dog growled again, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to demand the truth. Officers exchanged uneasy glances. The room was silent but for Ranger's growls and the soft whispering of Emma's voice. The sense of anticipation was almost suffocating. Every instinct told Harris that the moment had reached a tipping point. This was no ordinary arrest. Something profound, something buried deep in time, was surfacing through the eyes of a child and the instincts of a dog. The suspect's hands trembled as he glanced around the station. He could not escape the piercing stare of the dog or the unflinching gaze of the little girl. His voice faltered. His eyes flicked down to his tattoo, then to Emma. The memories that had haunted him for years were clawing their way to the surface. He swallowed hard, a thin bead of sweat sliding down his cheek. The dog growled again, softer this time, almost mournful, as if aware that the truth he sought was tangled in sorrow and pain. Emma's mother clutched her daughter tightly. "Emma, we need to leave," she whispered, her voice quivering. But Emma's attention never wavered. She had seen something that no adult could ignore. She had recognized the man, his tattoo, and somehow the dog had confirmed her unspoken suspicion. Detective Harris leaned back slightly, processing the scene. His hand hovered near his radio, ready to call for backup or additional resources, but something told him to wait. The moment was delicate. The child, the suspect, the dog, each was a living piece of a puzzle he was only beginning to understand. Then Ranger did something no one expected. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate, closing the small distance between him and the suspect. The growl softened into a low, continuous rumble. The dog pressed his nose near the tattoo, his eyes never leaving the suspect's face. It was not aggression. It was recognition. and for the first time the suspect flinched visibly. His hands went to his face and he shook his head, as if trying to push away a memory that had been buried for too long. Emma whispered almost to herself, "He remembers Daddy too." Her words barely carried, but the meaning was clear. The suspect's mask had begun to crack. Ranger's stance was unwavering. Something was about to happen, a revelation that would shake the small station to its core. The tension was suffocating. Officers remained frozen, unsure how to proceed. The mother's tears glistened in the fluorescent light. Emma's small hands trembled as she gripped the edge of her chair, eyes locked on the suspect. And the suspect, finally, could no longer hide. His lips parted slightly, a shudder running through his body, and a single, shaky breath escaped. Ranger's growl softened even further, almost mournful, as if he were preparing for what the suspect was about to reveal. The room seemed to lean forward in anticipation. Every officer, every civilian, every witness held their breath. And in that charged silence, a single, unspoken truth hovered. The past, long buried, was about to collide with the present, and the consequences would ripple through everyone in that station. The suspect swallowed again, eyes darting to Emma. I remember him," he whispered. "Your father, he saved me, but—" His voice cracked, faltering in ways that made the blood run cold. Ranger's growl had become a low, steady rumble, almost approving. And Emma, small but fierce, watched him, knowing that the story of her missing father, her own family, was about to be unveiled. The door to the holding cell swung open slightly, as the suspect's next words trembled on his lips. The room waited. The dog waited. And the truth, long silent, was about to speak. The holding cell door creaked on its hinges, a small sound that seemed enormous in the tense, expectant air. The suspect, trembling now, barely lifted his eyes from the floor. Ranger's growl was steady, low, a vibrating hum that filled the space between man and dog. Detective Harris took a cautious step forward, hand hovering over his holstered weapon, not out of fear for the child, but because he had never witnessed a dog act with such deliberate, almost human intent. Emma remained frozen, small feet planted on the dusty floor tiles, staring at the man who had haunted her dreams since her father disappeared. The tattoo on his wrist glinted under the harsh fluorescent light, coiled like a serpent, whispering secrets that only some could recognize. The dog's nose twitched, ears flat, tail stiff. Ranger wasn't attacking. He was guarding, probing, waiting for a truth no one else could force from this man. The suspect swallowed hard, voice shaky. I didn't mean for any of it to happen." Ranger barked sharply, a single commanding note that cut through the room. Every officer instinctively jumped, hands gripping radios and holsters, but Ranger didn't move from his post. He stayed, eyes locked on the tattoo, muzzle just inches from the man's wrist. Harris realized the dog was reading the man like a living lie detector, a silent interrogator demanding answers that words alone couldn't summon. Emma's small voice broke the heavy tension. "Why did you take him?" she whispered. "Why did you make him disappear?" Her innocence, her pure demand for truth, echoed like a hammer against the walls of the station. The suspect's lips trembled, but the words refused to form. His eyes flicked to the dog as if pleading silently for mercy, but Ranger didn't waver. "Emma," her mother hissed, gripping her arm. "Stay back, don't." But Emma didn't move. She had spent years imagining this confrontation, imagining the man who had taken her father and the dog, an almost mystical force, seemed to give her courage. She stepped forward, closer to Ranger, feeling the warmth of his coat and the electric tension in the air. The dog nudged her hand gently with his nose, as if acknowledging her bravery before returning his attention to the man. The suspect's hands began to shake violently. He pulled at the cuffs, tried to shift in the chair, but Ranger's presence was immovable. The dog's gaze followed him with uncanny precision, every movement of the suspect mirrored by the tense muscles of the K9. Harris could see the panic rising in the man's chest like a storm about to break. "Ranger, heel," the handler shouted, voice cracking slightly, but Ranger didn't move. The dog ignored him completely, as though the child's recognition had overridden years of training. Harris's heart pounded. He had seen obedience and loyalty, but never this understanding. Ranger wasn't just reacting. He was connecting dots that no human could yet comprehend. The suspect's breathing grew ragged. "I didn't mean I," his voice broke, tears glistening in his eyes. For a brief moment it seemed as if the truth might remain buried behind fear. But Ranger pressed forward just slightly, enough to push the man's hand into the air, forcing him to reveal the tattoo fully. The coiled serpent seemed to dance in the fluorescent glare, a symbol of secrets and sins, now illuminated for all to see. Emma whispered more to herself than anyone else. "He knows Daddy. He remembers him." The dog's low growl softened, almost a murmur now, as if acknowledging the little girl's words. Harris noticed something chilling. The dog's eyes reflected a memory, an understanding, a recognition of someone long gone. He realized Ranger had probably known her father, perhaps not in life but in instinct. Some bond, invisible to humans, had persisted through years and miles, waiting for this moment. The suspect slumped in the chair, his defenses crumbling. "Your father, he saved me," he admitted finally, voice trembling. "I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't know it would. I didn't know he would," he trailed off, the words suffocating him. Ranger's growl faded into a soft whine, mournful and haunting, the kind of sound that seemed to carry years of unspoken grief. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. Did he die?" she asked, her voice breaking. The man hesitated, staring at the child, then at the dog. I don't know," he admitted. The room went silent. Even the bustling noise of the station seemed to fade into the background. Every officer, every witness felt the weight of the moment, a truth long buried, slowly unraveling under the gaze of a child and the instincts of a dog who refused to ignore it. Ranger stepped closer, nudging the man's wrist gently as if demanding more than words could provide. The suspect flinched, the last wall of composure shattering. He dropped his gaze, then slowly lifted it, eyes full of guilt and fear. "He tried to protect me, that's all I can say. He saved me, and I couldn't save him in return." Emma gasped softly, her small hands trembling. The dog whimpered once, softly, almost sorrowfully, his eyes fixed on the man. Harris felt a chill run down his spine. The connection between them, child, dog, and man, was more than coincidence. It was a convergence of fate, instinct, and memory, all colliding in a single moment of unbearable tension. The suspect's confession hung in the air, incomplete, heavy with unspoken truths. Ranger's posture remained taut, not aggressive but vigilant, almost accusatory. He refused to let the man relax, refused to let the lie linger. Harris realized the dog's loyalty wasn't just to the police force. It extended to a truth beyond training, to a man who had died protecting another. Emma's mother stepped forward, trembling. "Emma, please," she whispered, but the girl held firm, gripping the edge of the chair, eyes never leaving the suspect. She didn't need an adult to guide her here. She understood that this moment was larger than fear, larger than herself. The suspect finally raised his hands to his face, covering his eyes. "I didn't want him to die," he whispered. I tried to protect him, but it was too late." Ranger let out a soft, mournful whine, sitting back slightly but never losing focus. He had achieved what he instinctively needed to do. The truth had been acknowledged, even if only partially. The dog's eyes lingered on the suspect, as if silently judging, silently mourning, and silently promising that justice, whatever shape it would take, was not finished. Detective Harris swallowed hard, realizing the depth of what was unfolding. The child's memory, the dog's instincts, and the suspect's crumbling defenses were converging to reveal a story decades in the making. The room seemed suspended in time, each second stretching unbearably as the layers of truth peeled away. Then, almost imperceptibly, Ranger tilted his head toward the exit, glancing at Emma as if inviting her to follow. The little girl understood immediately. She stepped forward, heart pounding, tears streaming down her cheeks, and the suspect's eyes followed her. Something in the dog's stance promised that the next step would uncover more than just a confession. It would uncover a path to a father lost, a mystery buried, and a truth that had been waiting for years to come home. The suspect's lips quivered. You don't know what you're getting into," he whispered, voice barely audible. Ranger barked once, short and sharp, and Harris realized the dog wasn't threatening, it was warning. A warning that the story was far from over, that the next revelation would shake every belief in that room. The little girl, her mother clutching her arm, took a deep breath. Ranger stepped beside her, powerful and unwavering, as if standing guard not just for the girl, but for the memory of a man who had been lost too soon. And in that charged silence, Detective Harris understood. Whatever came next, it would change everything. The past was awakening. The dog had remembered. And the missing father's story was about to unfold. Detective Harris ran a hand over his face, trying to steady his racing thoughts. The suspect, pale and trembling, remained seated in the holding cell, sweat slicking his temples. Ranger, the police dog, sat rigidly beside the little girl, Emma, eyes never leaving the man. Every officer in the station seemed frozen, caught in the gravity of a moment that had escalated far beyond protocol. It wasn't just a routine arrest anymore. It was the reopening of a case thought cold for over a decade. Harris's mind raced back to the files he'd once shelved, dusty folders labeled Undercover Officer Missing 2011. The tattoos, the mysterious disappearance, the rumors of a criminal syndicate that had somehow slipped through the cracks. And now here was Emma, clutching her backpack with trembling hands, staring at a man whose wrist bore the same tattoo her father had. He leaned closer to the suspect, voice low but firm. "You need to tell me everything. Who are you working with? What happened to him?" The man's hands trembled uncontrollably. He opened his mouth, closed it, and finally muttered, I didn't think it would come back to this. I thought no one would remember." His eyes flicked to Ranger, then back to Emma, and fear etched every line of his face. Ranger growled softly, a sound that vibrated through the room with an almost sentient awareness. It was a warning, a reminder, a silent insistence that the man could not hide the truth any longer. Harris felt a chill as he realized the dog's instincts weren't just reacting, they were guiding the investigation. Emma, small but fearless, stepped closer. "Did you see him? My dad," she asked, her voice quivering but steady. "Did he save you?" The man swallowed hard, tears brimming. "He did. He saved me. I was trapped, cornered, and he stepped in. I owe him my life." His voice faltered, cracking under the weight of memory and guilt. Ranger whined softly, nudging Emma's leg, almost comforting her, acknowledging the truth in her words. Harris motioned for a laptop and began searching through the old case files, cross-referencing the tattoo with known criminal organizations. His heart pounded as connections emerged, names, dates, raids, disappearances, all pointing to the very man sitting in front of them. Emma's father had been working undercover, infiltrating a dangerous syndicate with a reach that extended across the state. The files detailed a raid gone wrong, a betrayal within the force, and a sudden disappearance that had left his family grieving and his colleagues haunted. Emma's mother clutched her daughter tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Oh my God, it was him, all these years," she whispered, her voice breaking under the weight of grief and relief. Emma didn't speak. She only stared at the suspect as if willing him to reveal the next piece of the puzzle. The suspect's hands shook as he reached into his jacket, pulling out a small, folded piece of paper. "He gave this to me," he said, voice barely audible. He said if anything happened, I was to give it to someone he trusted. I never thought I'd have to." He handed the paper to Harris. It was a small notebook, worn and tattered, filled with notes, sketches, and cryptic messages, evidence of undercover operation, names of criminals, and coded warnings. Ranger sniffed the paper, growling softly, tail stiff. It was clear the dog recognized the significance. Harris flipped through the pages, his eyes widening with each revelation. The notebook contained proof of criminal activities, names of corrupt officers, and locations tied to past raids. It was more than evidence. It was a roadmap to justice long delayed. Emma leaned forward, small fingers brushing against the edge of the notebook. This is Daddy?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. The suspect nodded, tears streaming down his face. He wanted to make sure the truth came out. He knew I'd be too scared, too weak. He trusted you or someone like you." Harris's mind raced. This was a breakthrough, a cold case reopened by a child's memory and a dog's instincts. But it also posed danger. The syndicate Emma's father had infiltrated was still active, still dangerous. And now, with the notebook in their hands, they had just made themselves a target. The suspect's voice broke the silence. "If they find out I've talked, they'll come after me. They'll come after her." He nodded toward Emma. Ranger growled sharply, standing slightly, muscles taut. The dog's protective instincts flared. He wasn't just guarding a child. He was guarding the memory, the legacy, of a man who had once risked everything to save a life. Emma's mother hugged her tightly. "We won't let anything happen to you," she whispered, voice trembling. But Emma's gaze remained fixed on the suspect, and Ranger's unwavering stare mirrored her resolve. Something was about to happen, something that would bring the past crashing into the present. Harris stood, holding the notebook carefully. "We need to secure this, protect the girl, and get him into witness protection if he's going to testify. But we also need to act fast. The people involved, they won't sit quietly for long." His words hung heavy in the air, the weight of impending danger pressing down on everyone in the room. Suddenly, Ranger barked, a sharp, commanding sound that echoed off the walls. Everyone froze. The dog's ears were pricked, his body tense. Harris followed his gaze to the entrance of the station. Through the glass doors, shadows shifted. Someone was outside, lingering longer than usual, watching. The hairs on the back of Harris's neck stood on end. Emma gripped Ranger's fur tightly. The dog pressed against her, steady and unwavering. The shadow outside didn't move, didn't leave. The message was clear. The past was not finished. Whatever forces had taken her father, whatever enemies had waited in the wings, were still out there, and now they had been alerted. The suspect whispered almost to himself, "They'll come for this, for the notebook, for her." His hands shook, crumpling in his lap. Ranger growled, low and threatening, body coiled like a spring. The little girl, Emma, felt her heart pound but didn't flinch. She knew instinctively that the dog was her protector, her father's legacy alive in fur and muscle. Detective Harris stepped closer to the desk, lowering his voice. "We need to act fast. Witness protection, secure the evidence, and keep the girl safe. But make no mistake, they'll come. And when they do, we need to be ready." His eyes swept across the room, landing on Ranger and Emma. There was a quiet understanding this was more than a case. It was a story of loyalty, of courage, and of a father's sacrifice finally coming to light. The suspect buried his face in his hands. I just hope it's not too late," he whispered. Ranger pressed closer to Emma, letting out a soft whine that echoed the fear, the hope, and the tension that hung in the air. And then, without warning, a loud thud came from the entrance. The shadow outside had moved closer. A figure could be seen through the glass, indistinct but deliberate. Someone or something was waiting. Harris's heart raced. Ranger growled, stiffening instantly. Emma gripped the dog's fur. The suspect's head snapped up, eyes wide in terror. The room held its breath, knowing that the next moment could change everything, could either reveal more of the truth or plunge them into danger deeper than anyone had anticipated. The past had resurfaced. The danger was closing in. And the missing father's legacy was about to collide with the present in ways no one could predict. Detective Harris stared at the notebook in disbelief. The small, worn pages, scrawled with notes, diagrams, and names, told a story he had only glimpsed in fragmented case files over a decade ago. As he flipped through them, a chill ran down his spine. The tattoo, the coiled serpent wrapped around an anchor, was no mere decoration. It was a mark, a covert symbol used by a dangerous criminal ring known for branding traitors and warning those who interfered with their operations. Emma's father had not just disappeared by accident. He had been tangled in something deadly, and the tattoo was a warning that some men carried to remind others of their allegiance or their betrayal. The suspect's hands trembled as he sat across from Harris and Ranger. Sweat slicked his brow. He glanced at the dog, who remained perfectly still, eyes locked on him, unflinching. It's worse than you think," the man whispered, voice barely audible. "Your father, he got involved with them to protect someone. He tried to take evidence, stop them from hurting more people. That tattoo, it was their way of marking us, marking the guilty, marking those they didn't trust." Emma's small hands gripped her backpack tighter. "So, Daddy, he was fighting them." Her voice trembled, equal parts fear and awe. The suspect nodded, tears streaking his face. "He was trying to bring them down from the inside. He saved lives more than you can imagine, but he made enemies, powerful enemies. That tattoo, it wasn't just a mark. It was a curse. Anyone with it could be hunted, silenced, disappeared." Ranger growled softly, a low, warning rumble that filled the room. Harris realized the dog's reaction was more than instinct. Ranger recognized danger tied to the tattoo. It wasn't just the man. It was the symbol itself, a warning the dog had once encountered and never forgotten. Emma's mother clutched her daughter's shoulder. "Oh my God, we didn't know," she whispered, voice shaking. "All these years." Harris's eyes narrowed. He studied the suspect closely. "And you, why are you here? Why show yourself now?" The man swallowed hard. "Because the notebook, it's proof. If they find it, they'll come after her. They'll come after anyone who knows. I can't protect her anymore. But your father, he trusted someone would finish what he started. And now I see that someone is here." Emma stepped forward, bravery mixing with terror. "Daddy wanted the truth to come out." The suspect nodded, his voice breaking. "Yes, that's why he left clues, why he never came home. He knew they'd try to erase everything, but he also knew someone would find it, someone like you." Ranger nudged Emma gently, almost approvingly, as if acknowledging the link she had to her father. Harris's mind raced. The criminal ring, the tattoo, the missing officer, everything fit together in a terrifying puzzle. The father's bravery had placed him in mortal danger, and now, decades later, the consequences were closing in. "We need to secure the notebook and protect the girl," Harris said, voice firm. "But first, we need to know everything. Names, locations, operations. What did your father uncover?" The suspect's voice wavered. He got too close. He uncovered a shipment of weapons, corruption inside the force, and a plan to silence anyone who interfered. He tried to warn the right people, but they found him first. I tried to protect him, but—" His voice faltered, tears streaming freely. Ranger whimpered softly, pressing closer to Emma, sensing the sorrow that filled the room. Emma's eyes widened. "So Daddy, her voice caught. "Yes," the suspect whispered, voice thick with guilt. "He didn't make it. He saved me, but he paid the price. That's why I never came forward. That's why the tattoo, it haunted me. I thought hiding it would keep you safe, keep his memory buried, but it's not safe anymore. They'll come for the evidence. They'll come for her." Ranger growled sharply, muscles coiled. The dog's body was a warning, a living shield ready to act. Harris's stomach tightened. They were already in danger. The shadows waiting outside the station were proof enough. And now the girl, the living link to her father's heroism, was exposed. Emma's mother shook her head, holding her daughter close. "We can't let them take her. We won't." Harris nodded, flipping through the notebook. Names of high-ranking criminals, corrupt officers, and hidden operations stared back at him. "We need to move fast," he said. "Witness protection, secure the evidence, and alert the feds. This goes beyond a local case. The father's work, it's bigger than we thought." The suspect leaned forward, voice trembling. "If they find out I've spoken, they'll come after all of you. Anyone with the notebook, anyone who knows. I've seen what they do. They don't hesitate. The tattoo is a warning, but it's also a promise. Cross us and you pay the price." Ranger's growl deepened, resonant and commanding. The dog's gaze flicked from the suspect to Emma, as if pledging loyalty and protection. Harris realized in that moment that Ranger wasn't just a police dog. He was a guardian of a legacy, a living connection to the father who had sacrificed everything. Emma stepped closer to Ranger, small hands gripping his fur. We'll be okay, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The dog's warm body pressed against her, tail stiff, ears alert. Harris felt the tension in the room tighten even further. Every second mattered. Every movement could trigger a response from those still lurking in the shadows. The suspect's hands trembled as he glanced at the door, voice barely audible. They always know, and now that the notebook is here, they'll act. They'll come for her. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the station entrance. The shadows waiting outside had moved. Someone or several someones were approaching, intent unmistakable in their deliberate footsteps. Ranger barked sharply, coiling into a protective stance in front of Emma. The officers grabbed their weapons, but Harris raised a hand. "Wait," he said. "Let's see who it is." Through the glass, figures became visible, tall, imposing, moving with purpose. The weight of the father's past and the danger of the present collided in a single moment. Emma clutched Ranger tightly, feeling the dog's reassuring strength. The suspect's lips quivered, terror etched into his face. Harris's stomach tightened. "They know we have the notebook," he muttered, "and they're coming for it and for her." The dog let out a low, warning growl that vibrated through the room. Emma whispered softly, "It's okay, Ranger will be ready." Her voice was small but firm. The dog pressed closer, tail stiff, ears flat, muscles coiled. The shadows outside paused, and the room seemed to hold its breath. The past had resurfaced. The father's sacrifice had created a ripple, and now the danger was converging on the present. The tattoo, once a symbol of allegiance, had revealed itself as a mark of peril, a legacy that could not remain hidden. And in that charged silence, one truth was undeniable. The story was far from over. The threat was real. The father's secret was alive. And the girl, the dog, and the suspect were standing on the edge of a confrontation none of them could predict. The police station had gone silent, but for the low hum of fluorescent lights and the soft whine of Ranger's alert growl. Emma's small hands trembled as she gripped the dog's fur, her dark brown eyes fixed on the suspect. He sat slumped in the chair, hands clenching the edges, trembling under the weight of what had been buried for years. Every instinct in the room screamed that the moment had arrived when the truth, long hidden, painful, and raw, would finally spill out. Emma leaned forward slightly, voice trembling but clear. Did he save you too?" The question hung in the air, soft as a whisper but loaded with inevitability. The suspect froze, his pale face paling further. He pressed his hands to his face, stifling a sob, as though the weight of decades had finally pressed down on him all at once. Ranger's growl softened, a low, mournful hum, almost sympathetic, as if the dog understood that the moment of revelation was near and it would be devastating. Detective Harris stepped closer, trying to gauge the suspect's state. He could see the man's shoulders shaking violently, hear the ragged intake of breath that betrayed long-suppressed guilt. "You need to tell us everything," Harris urged, voice low but firm. "Your words matter. She needs to know what happened." The suspect lifted his eyes slowly, glistening with unshed tears. I can't lie anymore," he whispered. "I've carried this for too long. Your father was the bravest man I've ever known. He saved me more than once. He saved others too. He stepped into danger knowing he might never come home, and he didn't." Emma gasped softly, her small hand clinging to Ranger's fur as though the dog might anchor her in reality. He didn't come home." Her voice caught, tears welling in her eyes. The suspect nodded, voice breaking. "No, the people he was fighting, the syndicate, they were ruthless. He went undercover to take them down, to stop their plans, to protect innocent lives. And I wasn't strong enough. I failed him." Ranger pressed against Emma, nuzzling her shoulder as though offering silent comfort. His eyes never left the man, unwavering, patient, but insistent. The dog understood the gravity of what was being revealed, the connection between the child and the father she barely remembered but loved more than life itself. Emma's mother stepped forward, hands trembling. "Tell us everything," she said softly, voice breaking. "We need the truth." The suspect swallowed hard, tears streaming down his face. "It started with the tattoo," he whispered. "They branded anyone who got too close, anyone who tried to stop them. Your father didn't have it, but he knew what it meant. He infiltrated the ring to stop their weapons shipments, their killings, the corruption in the force, everything. And he trusted me to help him. I failed. I left clues for you, for someone to find, but I never expected it to be her, the little girl who remembers." Emma's voice trembled as she whispered, He left clues for me." The suspect nodded, voice barely audible. Yes, he knew someone would have to finish what he started. The notebook, the tattoo, the patterns, all of it. He wanted justice, even if he couldn't survive to see it. Ranger let out a soft whine, pressing closer to Emma, as if acknowledging the weight of her father's sacrifice. Harris felt his stomach tighten. The layers of the past were unraveling in real time, the danger and heroism intertwining. "And what happened to him?" he asked, carefully, knowing the answer would cut to the heart of Emma's loss. The suspect's hands shook violently. "They found him, the syndicate, the corrupt officers, they found him during a raid. He saved lives that day. I owe my life to him," but his voice broke completely, tears spilling freely. Ranger let out a mournful whine as if echoing the grief that filled the room. "He didn't make it. He died protecting me and others. That's why I stayed silent. I thought hiding everything would protect his family, protect her, but it won't. The danger isn't gone. And now." His voice trailed off, fear and guilt written across every line of his face. Emma's small shoulders shook as tears streaked down her cheeks. He's gone," she whispered. The suspect nodded. "Yes, but he left a path, and now you're the one who can finish it." Ranger pressed against her, comforting her but also warning her. The fight was far from over. Harris's heart pounded. The father's undercover work, the syndicate, the corrupted officers, it was all real. And now, with the notebook in their hands and Emma unknowingly at the center, the danger was immediate. He turned to the officers. "We need to secure her, protect the evidence, and alert the federal task force. This isn't just a local matter. It's bigger than we imagined." Ranger's growl grew slightly, alerting everyone in the room to the unseen threat. Emma pressed closer to the dog, her small hands gripping his fur tightly. The shadows outside the station seemed to shift, deliberate and patient. The syndicate had already begun moving, and they knew someone had discovered the truth. The suspect whispered urgently, voice breaking, "If they find the notebook, if they know she's here, they'll come for her. I've seen what they do. They don't hesitate. They won't stop until everything connected to him is destroyed." Ranger barked sharply, a sound that sliced through the thick tension. The dog's eyes locked on the entrance of the station, muscles coiled, every instinct alert. Emma's gaze followed Ranger's, small hands trembling but determined. She felt a connection, a living link to her father's courage, and a promise from the dog that she would not face this alone. Emma whispered more to herself than anyone else, "Daddy, I'll finish it. I'll make it right." Ranger nudged her gently, tail stiff, ears alert, as if acknowledging her resolve. The suspect's lips trembled, tears streaming down his face, knowing that the daughter he had unknowingly endangered was ready to carry forward the father's legacy. Detective Harris's mind raced. The next steps had to be precise, calculated, and fast. The shadows outside meant danger was imminent, and the syndicate would not wait. But in the middle of it all, a moment of quiet realization settled in. The child, the dog, and the notebook were more than just evidence. They were the key to justice, the living memory of a hero who had sacrificed everything. The suspect's voice broke the silence once more, trembling and urgent. You don't understand. They're relentless, and now they know. They'll come for her. They'll come for the notebook. And if they catch you off guard," His words trailed off, a warning unspoken but clear. Ranger pressed closer to Emma, growling low, protective, unwavering. The little girl clutched the dog, tears streaming, heart pounding. But inside her chest, a flicker of courage ignited. The story of her father, the sacrifices he made, and the dangers he faced were now hers to carry, and she would not turn away. A sudden noise outside the station door made everyone freeze, footsteps, deliberate, echoing in the empty hallway. The shadows had moved closer. The danger was here. Emma whispered softly to Ranger, "It's okay, we'll be ready." The dog's growl shifted, a low warning, but also a promise. She would not face the darkness alone. The suspect's lips quivered as he realized the inevitable. "It's time," he whispered. "Time to finish what he started." The air in the station seemed to crackle with tension. The past, long buried in secrecy, was converging with the present. Ranger's eyes, dark and unwavering, locked on the approaching threat. Emma's heart pounded in sync with the dog's protective stance. And Detective Harris knew, in the marrow of his bones, that what came next would decide not just justice, but survival. The father's legacy had awakened. The dog had remembered. And the girl, standing small but fearless, was about to face a danger that would test courage, loyalty, and love like never before. The fluorescent lights of the police station flickered overhead as the tension in the room thickened, nearly tangible. Ranger, the police dog, remained a taut figure of protective instinct, blocking Emma from the suspect, eyes locked on the entrance where shadows shifted with deliberate intent. Every officer held their breath, hands hovering over weapons, radios crackling softly in anticipation. Outside, footsteps echoed in the night, deliberate and unnervingly calm. The syndicate had found them. Emma's small hand pressed against Ranger's thick fur. Her heart pounded, but there was no fear, only determination. Her father's legacy coursed through her, invisible but powerful, pushing her forward even as the danger grew closer. "We're ready," she whispered softly, almost to herself. Ranger responded with a low, threatening growl, a guardian who had pledged his loyalty not just to the badge, but to the memory of a hero long gone. Detective Harris moved quickly, signaling for backup on the radio. "Secure the perimeter. Keep eyes on every exit. Don't let anyone near the girl or the notebook," he commanded, voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. The suspect, pale and trembling, sat slumped in the chair, hands covering his face. He had confessed, revealed the depth of corruption, and outlined the syndicate's network. But he knew better than anyone that his words had made them a target. The first figure appeared in the doorway, a man in a dark coat, face obscured, moving with deadly purpose. Ranger barked sharply, leaping forward instinctively, ears flat, teeth bared. The man froze for a split second, calculating. Harris shouted, "Freeze, police!" The figure didn't retreat. He stepped forward, faster now, and a second shadow emerged behind him. The station had become a cage, and every second felt like a minute as the intruders closed the distance. Emma clutched Ranger's fur, feeling the dog tense beneath her hands. His growl rumbled low and steady, a warning that cut through the chaos. Suddenly, Ranger lunged slightly forward, a controlled but aggressive move, and the first intruder froze, startled. Harris and the officers drew their weapons, shouting commands, but Ranger had already taken the first step in defense, positioning himself between Emma and danger. Emma's mother clutched her daughter tightly, whispering, "Stay behind him, stay safe." But Emma's gaze didn't waver. She knew this was the moment her father had fought for. This was the culmination of bravery, courage, and sacrifice. She would not turn away. The intruders advanced slowly with precision, and the suspect whispered hoarsely, "They're professionals. They'll kill without hesitation." Ranger growled, low and fierce, muscles coiled, ready to strike at the first sign of aggression. Harris knew the dog's instincts were unmatched. The K9 wasn't just a trained officer. It was a living weapon, a protector who understood the stakes in ways humans could barely comprehend. Suddenly, the first intruder lunged, reaching for the notebook. Ranger reacted instantly, leaping with explosive precision, teeth snapping near the man's wrist, forcing him to stumble back. The second intruder froze, pulling a weapon. Officers opened fire with warning shots, the deafening cracks echoing through the station. Chaos erupted. Emma pressed herself against Ranger's side, heart racing. The dog shifted protectively, growl vibrating in his chest, ready to intercept any threat. Harris ducked behind a desk, signaling officers to flank. The suspect had slumped further, hands over his face, unable to move. The notebook, proof of a decade-old conspiracy, was the center of a storm now erupting around them. The intruders recovered quickly, moving with military precision. But Ranger was relentless. He darted between the shadows, teeth flashing, growling ferociously. Each attack was calculated, protective, instinctive. Emma followed instinctively, ducking and moving with him, her small body guided by the dog's unwavering vigilance. The officers coordinated, cutting off exits, herding the intruders toward containment. In the midst of the chaos, Harris caught a glimpse of the figure's tattooed wrist, the same coiled serpent symbol marking him as a member of the syndicate. His pulse quickened. The legacy, the danger, the truth, it had all led here. Emma's father had faced this symbol, fought against it, and now, decades later, his daughter and the dog were confronting it too. The dog's growl grew louder, echoing through the station, as he pinned the first intruder to the floor. Emma's small hands pressed against Ranger's fur, steadying herself as if drawing courage directly from his strength. She could feel the tension, the fear, and the determination, all interwoven in the silent bond between girl and dog. The intruders tried to retreat, but Harris and the officers had them cornered. Weapons raised, orders shouted, tension snapping like a taut wire. Ranger maintained his position, unwavering, teeth bared, body a living barricade. And then, as if sensing the shift in momentum, Emma whispered to Ranger, "Now, go." The dog sprang, fast as lightning, intercepting the second intruder before he could reach the notebook. Harris moved simultaneously, catching the man in a firm grip as officers restrained the first. The room erupted into controlled chaos, the syndicate's operatives overwhelmed by the combined force of police strategy, Emma's courage, and Ranger's deadly precision. As the last intruder was restrained, Ranger pressed against Emma, breathing heavy but uninjured, tail wagging slightly as if acknowledging her bravery. Emma's eyes filled with tears, not from fear, but from the release of tension, the culmination of years of danger, mystery, and the legacy of a father she barely remembered but deeply revered. Harris breathed a long sigh, glancing around at the subdued intruders, the shaken officers, and the small girl standing resolute beside the dog. "It's over for now," he said, voice heavy. "But the truth is out. Your father's work, his bravery, it's alive in you, and it's alive in him." He nodded toward Ranger, who let out a soft whine, tail stiff but relaxed, eyes watching the last restrained intruder. Emma's mother hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You were so brave," she whispered. "So incredibly brave." Emma clutched Ranger, feeling the warmth and strength radiating from him. The dog had protected her, guided her, and now, in the aftermath, had fulfilled the legacy of the father she had lost. The suspect, still seated, lifted his head slowly. She's what he fought for," he whispered hoarsely. "She's the one who carries it forward. I never imagined she'd be the one to finish what he started." Ranger pressed closer to Emma, as if acknowledging the man's words, growls softening to a protective murmur. Harris flipped through the notebook one final time, ensuring every page, every note, every clue had been accounted for. The federal task force was en route, evidence secured, and the syndicate's operatives were contained. The danger wasn't completely gone, but justice had made its first tangible step. Emma looked down at Ranger, small hands resting on his head. "We did it," she whispered, voice trembling but firm. "We finished it." Ranger pressed his warm nose into her palm, a silent promise of loyalty, protection, and remembrance. Harris watched the exchange, understanding the full gravity of the moment. This wasn't just about law enforcement, or evidence, or arrests. This was about legacy, courage, and the invisible threads connecting the past to the present. Ranger, the dog who had refused to abandon instinct, and Emma, the child who had remembered, had together completed a mission decades in the making. And as the flashing lights of backup cars illuminated the station, casting shadows against the walls, Harris knew one thing with certainty. The father's sacrifice had not been in vain. His legacy was alive, vivid, powerful, and unstoppable in his daughter in the dog, and in the justice they had achieved together. Yet even as the immediate threat was neutralized, a quiet unease lingered. Somewhere out there, remnants of the syndicate would regroup. The world they had uncovered was larger, more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. But for now, in this station, in this moment, the past had been confronted, the truth revealed, and courage honored. Emma stepped back, still holding Ranger's fur, eyes scanning the subdued intruders. "Daddy, we did it," she whispered softly, voice carrying the weight of grief, courage, and resolution. Ranger nudged her gently, tail stiff but wagging slightly. The bond between them, forged in instinct, memory, and loyalty, had seen them through. Detective Harris glanced around the room, taking in the chaos, the bravery, and the resolution. "It's not over," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "But it's a start, and it's a start that your father would be proud of." Ranger let out a soft whine, almost mournful, almost triumphant, pressing against Emma. And in that moment, the past and present intertwined, danger had been faced, and the legacy of a man who had given everything for justice lived on through the girl and the dog who refused to abandon her. The confrontation was over. The father's sacrifice had been honored. And the story finally was ready to continue, but the echoes of the past would never be forgotten. The station had finally settled into an uneasy calm. The intruders were restrained, the notebook secured, and federal backup had arrived, bringing heavy-duty agents, evidence collection teams, and reinforced protection. But for Emma, it wasn't just the chaos that had ended. It was the culmination of a long, dangerous journey that had begun with a whisper, a tattoo, and a dog who refused to abandon her. Ranger sat by her side, tail stiff but wagging slightly, eyes attentive. The dog's instincts remained alert, scanning the perimeter, a living shield that had already proven its loyalty and precision countless times. Emma's small hands rested on his thick fur, and she felt the warmth, the steady presence, and the unspoken promise that no threat would go unnoticed. To her, Ranger was more than a dog. He was the last connection to her father, the silent guardian who had carried his legacy forward when no human could. Detective Harris crouched beside them, flipping through the last pages of the notebook. He looked up at Emma with a solemn expression. "Your father, he left everything he could to protect others, to stop them from hurting anyone else. You have that in your hands now, the evidence, the truth, and you've already proven courage beyond your years." Emma's eyes filled with tears. I just wanted to know him," she whispered. "I wanted to see him one more time, and I wanted to help Ranger find him." Ranger pressed his nose gently against her shoulder, almost knowingly. The dog had sensed the loss, had remembered her father, had connected the past and the present in ways no human words could describe. Emma hugged Ranger tightly, her grief, love, and pride all mingling in a single heartbeat. The suspect, sitting quietly nearby, glanced at Emma with trembling eyes. She's the reason he left clues. She's the one who carries it forward. I didn't think anyone could do it," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "But she did. She and Ranger, they finished what he started." Emma looked up, small but resolute. "I'm not done yet," she said softly. Her words, though small, carried the weight of someone who had faced danger, understood sacrifice, and embraced responsibility. "Daddy wanted justice, and I will make sure it's done." Ranger let out a soft, affirming whine, nudging her gently, as though pledging his lifelong loyalty to the promise. Detective Harris stood, brushing dust from his uniform. "And you won't have to do it alone," he said, eyes scanning the room. Federal agents had begun documenting evidence, and officers were coordinating the next steps to dismantle the syndicate completely. "There are people who will help you, guide you, but the courage, the heart, you already have." Emma nodded slowly, absorbing the gravity of his words. She understood now that bravery wasn't the absence of fear, it was acting despite it. And in the face of unimaginable danger, she had acted, guided by memory, instinct, and the silent wisdom of a dog who had remembered her father. Outside the station, flashing lights illuminated the night, casting shadows that flickered like memories across the walls. The threat was still out there. Fragments of the syndicate would regroup, others would attempt to bury the truth, but Emma knew the first battle had been won. And this time she would be ready. Ranger's eyes scanned the perimeter, vigilant, protective, every muscle coiled with purpose. He had earned her trust and she had earned his. Together, they were unstoppable. The suspect, finally finding his voice again, whispered, "Your father, he would have been proud. I just wish he could see you now." His gaze flicked to Ranger, then back to Emma, understanding that the child and the dog had bridged a decade-long gap between loss and justice. You're carrying more than you know, and you're doing it with bravery I could never have imagined." Emma's mother stepped forward, tears streaming, arms trembling as she wrapped them around her daughter. "You've been so brave, Emma," she whispered. "I don't think anyone could have done what you just did. Daddy would be so proud of you, and Ranger too." Emma hugged her mother tightly, then leaned back slightly to look at Ranger, who nuzzled her gently, eyes dark and solemn but filled with understanding. Detective Harris approached, holding out his hand to the suspect. "It's time to cooperate fully. You've done the hardest part, now help us bring them down completely. Your father's work won't be wasted." The man nodded silently, tears streaming, finally accepting that confession and cooperation were the only way to honor the memory of the man he had lost. Hours passed. Statements were recorded, the notebook was carefully documented and secured, and the federal agents coordinated a strategy to dismantle the syndicate entirely. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together. Emma sat quietly beside Ranger, small hands resting on his thick fur, silently processing the enormity of the events she had just survived. She had faced danger, uncovered long-hidden truths, and honored her father's legacy in ways no child should ever have to, but she had done it. As the night deepened, Harris knelt beside Emma, voice gentle. "You know, some people spend their entire lives never finding courage like yours, but you found it at just the right time. And Ranger, he's been your guide, your protector, your link to your father. That bond, it's rare and it's powerful. Never forget it." Emma stroked Ranger's head, letting the words sink in. She understood in that quiet moment that bravery came in many forms, in the whisper that revealed the truth, in the quiet loyalty of a dog, and in the small but determined heart of a little girl who refused to give up. The suspect was taken into protective custody, agreeing to testify against the remaining members of the syndicate. Ranger remained close to Emma, and Harris coordinated a plan to ensure her safety. Justice would continue, and though the father's absence was an ache that would never fully heal, his legacy had found a living testament in his daughter and the dog who remembered him. Emma whispered softly, almost to herself, "We'll keep going, Daddy will finish it." Ranger let out a soft whine, nudging her gently, tail stiff but wagging slightly, as if acknowledging her promise and joining her resolve. Harris watched them both, understanding the full circle of courage, love, and loyalty that had just unfolded. Outside the station, the night was calm, the air crisp and clear. But in the quiet, one truth resonated. A father's sacrifice had not been in vain, a daughter's courage had been proven, and a dog's loyalty had bridged the past and present. Together, they had faced unimaginable danger, uncovered hidden truths, and begun the journey toward justice that would honor the memory of the man who had given everything. As the first rays of dawn broke across the horizon, casting golden light over the city, Emma stood beside Ranger, notebook in hand, her heart steady, her resolve unbroken. The past had been confronted, the present survived, and the future was theirs to shape. And somewhere in the quiet spaces between memory and reality, the father's presence lingered, not in shadow, not in fear, but in courage, in love, and in the bond between a little girl and a dog who refused to forget. The story had ended, yet it was only the beginning. The father's legacy lived on, and Emma, with Ranger at her side, would carry it forward, undaunted, unbroken, unstoppable.